Let's talk about Aristotelian-Thomistic Psychology. Aristotle lived from 384 to 322 BC, and Thomas Aquinas lived from AD 1225 to 1274. Aristotle laid the groundwork for much of philosophy through antiquity and the medieval period. Aquinas is famous for developing and Christianizing Aristotle's ideas. The fundamentals of their philosophy of the human person is nearly identical. This video will make more sense if you watch my video on Aristotle's categories first. Learning starts from observation of individual, particular things. This leads to understanding of universal concepts. As we observe more and more things, we understand more universals. We can categorize them into 10 basic categories. These are divided into substance and 9 accidents. A substance is a subject or individual thing, as opposed to a predicate. There are 5 kinds of predicates that describe a subject: genus, difference, species, property, and accident. A genus plus a difference defines a species. This is the same as an essence, defined by whatever most differentiates one kind of thing from another kind of thing. This is also called nature, or secondary substance. It answers, "What is it?" by pointing to the kind of thing that it is. Note that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. A substance is an individual thing with an essence. We may distinguish the parts of a thing, but the whole is a new kind of whole. We may have a whole cow, but if we divide it into parts, we still have its parts, but we no longer have a cow. We can categorize different types of substances by their definitions, but also by their distinct actions and the powers that give rise to them. We can start by separating the living from the non-living, or the animate from the inanimate. Later, we can distinguish material substances, plants, animals, and humans with this scheme. Porphyry's tree classifies genus and species by the essential powers that define and differentiate different essences. Remember this for later as we talk about different powers. Let's back up and talk about life. What is life? Or what are the minimum activities that distinguish a living thing from a non-living thing? The life of a human looks very different than the life of a plant, but in a broad sense, we still both have the same basic operations of growth, nutrition, and reproduction. These 3 actions point us to the most basic power of life that all things have: the nutritive power, also called the vegetative power. Life is defined as self-nutrition, growth, and susceptibility to decay, according to Aristotle. It is not a state, but a certain kind of activity, and actions come from a power, in this case, the nutritive power. Now, the principle of life, or the principle of self-animation, or form of life, is called psyche in Greek, or anima in Latin. This is where we get the word animate or animal from. Since plants, animals, and humans have different forms of life, we say they have different animi. The plant anima, the animal anima, and a human anima. Our form of life is not a thing, not something we possess any more than I possess myself. Nor is it simply mechanical operation of parts, for there are other physical moving things that aren't alive. Life is an activity, not a material object, though it is something material objects do. When this activity ceases, so does the living thing. Though the body remains, it is not exactly human or animal because it is not animate. Generally speaking, we don't say the activities of life persist after death. That is literally how death is defined. So the principle or form of life, or anima, is attached to the body of a thing, but is not identical to the body. Aristotle says the body and psyche are no more separate than wax and an imprint on it. They are different, but inseparable without destruction. The English translation of anima and psyche is misleading, so I've tried to begin describing it without calling it what it is: soul. Aristotle defines the soul as the first act of a natural organic body, potentially having life. Now, act here means actuality or activity, as opposed to potentiality, or power, as I've already described. The actuality is the soul, and the potentiality is the body. So the soul is the first or primary activity of the kind of body that can potentially have life, namely an organic body with tissue and organs, and not made out of rocks or whatever. Another way to put it is that not all things can sustain life. To have life, we need the activities of growth, nutrition, and reproduction. In order for a physical thing to sustain these actions, it needs the kind of structure that can potentially sustain life, namely an organic body. We can say the first potentiality is the body, and the first actuality is the soul. But being actually alive doesn't mean something is at every moment actually reproducing or sensing or moving or whatever. But even while it sleeps, it has the first actuality or powers to do these things. The actions themselves are a second actuality. Since the soul is the principle or anima, we can say that the soul animates the body. But since it is united to the body as a seal on wax, it does not animate the body like a motor or extrinsic mover. Rather, it is the very life of the thing that makes it to be what it is. Another aspect of the soul being the actuality of the body is to say that it is the form of the body. Aristotle's four causes are the formal cause, material cause, efficient cause, and final cause. They ask, what is it? What's it made of? How'd it come to be? And why, or what's its purpose? When we ask, what is a human, we primarily ask after its form or soul, not its matter or body. Its form or explanation of what it is points to its most distinct activity of life and corresponding power. That's why a human or human nature is defined as rational animal. The soul is the form that makes an individual to be what it is, namely a substance. So it is called the substantial form of the body and carries the idea of essence and essential qualities, not accidental qualities like hair color or height. Another way to say it is that the soul is the form of the part, and the essence is the form of the whole. This means that the soul is the form of the body, but the formula for what makes a human is to be a soul-body composite. Neither of these are the subject or substance, the individual man, Socrates. Further, since the essence is the formula for what makes a human, it is the universal called human nature. But the form of the body is the form of a particular body, also known as designated matter, and is thus an individual soul. So Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle have the same essence but different souls, different substantial forms. This unity of body and soul is called hylomorphism. All living substances are composed of a substantial form and designated matter. This again points to the unity of body and soul. The soul is not a ghost in a shell or a motor. Since the life is an activity or actuality of this kind of body, it is not separable from it. Man is an embodied soul or ensouled body, not two substances, but one, a whole subject. Aristotle says the soul is inseparable from its body, or at any rate, that certain parts of it are. Yet Aristotle says some may be separable because they are not the activities or actualities of any body at all. Later we will see how immaterial human intellect points to its life after death. Now that we've got an idea of what a soul is, namely the form or life of a thing, we can understand better why Aristotle describes plants, animals, and humans as living different kinds of souls, based on their different activities and powers. Now let's dig deeper into these powers, identifying them by their actions. The first power we've already looked at, the nutritive power or vegetative power, is defined by its three actions: growth, nutrition, and reproduction. It also designates plant souls or forms of life and is a power that all living things have. While animals have the nutritive power, they also have the sensitive power, the power to sense things. The five senses are secondary powers called external sense powers, determined by their objects more than their organs. But we also have internal sense powers, which aren't really senses so much as the internal processing of disconnected sensory data into usable information. Imaging, also called fantasy or imagination, not to be confused with creativity, is the act of having a mental image of the form that is perceived. The common sense, not to be confused with practical wisdom, combines disconnected sensory data into a common object. What I see and what I feel are the same object. Having perceived something, the estimative power apprehends intentions and expectations of pleasure or pain. While animals do this with instinct, humans do this with reason, so it becomes the cogitative power. In order for animals to pursue or recall what they don't currently see, they need memory. But since humans can use reason to recall, so it becomes reminiscence. The sensitive power gives rise to the appetitive power, or appetite or passions. It's the seat of pleasure and pain, and consequently emotions. More specifically, emotions are organized into concupiscible and irascible appetites. The concupiscible power apprehends good and bad, or evil, simply, and consists in the desire to obtain pleasure, or love, and aversion to pain, or hate and sorrow. The irascible power apprehends good and bad as difficult to obtain or avoid, and consists in fight or flight, including hope, despair, daring, fear, and anger. The more complex the creature, the more complex their emotions. These passions are moderated by the cardinal virtues of temperance and courage, respectively. Appetite next gives rise to locomotion, the ability to move oneself away from pain and towards pleasure. It's present in some animals, but not all, so it represents a third mode of life, but still within the second kind of soul. Last and fifth comes the intellective power, or reason, that separates humans from animals. That's why we're called the rational animal. Intellect is divided into cognitive power, or thought, and intellectual appetite, or willing. These are the locations of the cardinal virtues of prudence and justice, as well as the intellectual virtues. Intellectual appetite is divided into the will, which is the fixed and necessary inclination and desire for the ultimate end of happiness, and the free will to choose various means of getting there, whether good or evil. Watch my video, Thomas Aquinas on Free Will, for more detail. Cognition has three acts of mind: understanding of universal concepts by means of terms, judgment of truth by means of propositions, and reasoning to causes by means of arguments. In summary, there are 5 powers in living things, 4 modes of life, and 3 souls, or life forms. Watch my video on Aristotle's categories and Porphyry's tree to see how this informs scientific classification and knowledge of universals. Let's return to whether the human soul can exist without the body. Aristotle says that while the soul is inseparable from its body, or at any rate that certain parts of it are, yet some may be separable because they are not the actualities of any body at all. There is a mind of such a kind as to become everything. This mind is separable, impassible, and unmixed, being in essence actuality. The excellence of the intellect is a thing apart. Aquinas says, it must necessarily be allowed that the principle of intellectual operation, which we call the soul, is a principle both incorporeal and subsistent. How can one prove the immateriality of the soul? First, human intellect understands abstract universals and animals can't. To understand is to conceive of an abstract universal concept that applies to all individuals, such as understanding that the definition of a tree applies to all trees in an unlimited way. Though animals have instinct and stimulus response habits, they don't understand universals as universal. A cow won't think about thinking or understand that other animals hunger. Since universals are unlimited, understanding is unlimited. Organs are limited by being physical because qualities or forms present in an organ limit it. But if the pupil were tinted, it would limit the colors seen, so it must be clear and free from color to perceive all color. Matter present in the mind would limit its ability to understand universals as universal and unlimited. Therefore, understanding must be free from the limits of the body. Note that while understanding uses the brain, it is not reducible to physical operation. Even scientists agree that consciousness has not been accounted for by matter. But the mind still uses the brain in this life because the soul is united to the body. Just as purely physical animals dream and have mental images, the human mind uses images as symbols for thinking about universals. When thinking about the universal concept tree, we imagine a particular tree, like an oak tree, as a symbol or a stand-in. But we know that the definition of tree also applies to oak trees, palm trees, or an unlimited number of other trees. Illness may hinder thinking, but this is a limit to the tool, not the nature of universals. In conclusion, therefore, the understanding of unlimited universals shows that the mind cannot be limited by being reduced to the operation of a physical organ. The immaterial soul is then the immortal soul. To see a map of Thomistic psychology, check out my handout provided in the description below this video.